Hello, listeners. Welcome to the episode 23 of the Unlocking the Energy Trilemma podcast. Today, Ravi and Jam speak with Peter O'Kelly from Australia about the reality of the electricity mix. Peter is the CEO of Costec Systems and a seasoned professional in the energy sector, particularly in coal and nuclear power plants. Do not miss the full conversation, and please, don't forget to subscribe if you aren't yet. Ravi, Jose, over to you.
Thank you, Ava, and welcome, Peter, to the Unlocking the Energy Trilemma podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Peter, for joining.
And as we do with all our guest speakers, I ask you, Peter, to share with our audience a fact or a figure related with the energy trilemma or energy transition that you think is relevant.
Yes, I could do that. When we talk about energy, we're talking primarily about electricity and the generation of electricity, which is a hot topic around the world these days, and particularly focused on the use of coal for electricity generation. In some parts of the world, coal has become almost a dirty word. In other parts, it's the essence of electricity generation. I'm on record somewhere, I have it in clear recollection, that I said that the best place for coal is in the ground, and it should be left there. And I'm aware that around the world there are many people who are of that view. And unfortunately, we haven't got the luxury right at the moment of that ideal of leaving the coal in the ground. We have no option but to continue to use it as a primary source of electricity. It is a dense, reliable, cheap, compact, very effective form of fuel for producing electricity. And it will continue, I think, to fulfill that role for many years, to allow the world's population, in the developing world certainly, to keep warm in winter, to keep cool in summer, and to provide the driving energy needed to keep the essential industries running that produce the goods and material upon which modern life depends so much. If there were a replacement immediately available of the same quality, of the same cost level, of the same reliability, that will allow us to remove coal from the electricity production chain, then nobody would be happier to see it disappear than I would. But that's not the case. And reality requires us to continue to depend heavily on coal to produce the essentials that modern life requires, to maintain the high standard of living that the developed world has become accustomed to, and the developing world has a perfect right to expect. I can see no way in the near future, or even in the intermediate future, that coal, and I think we can include in that gas, but fossil fuels generally, will continue to serve as the basis for electricity generation. In those countries which have attempted in recent years to divest themselves of coal-based generation, I can't say whether there's been a reduction in living standards, but there's certainly been a significant increase in the cost of electricity. And I think that's probably going to continue as the trend. I can't see any alternative on the horizon in the near or intermediate future to replace it. So I think we've just got to get used to the fact that it's there and it's going to stay for a while.
Mm-hmm. Peter, many countries, including Australia and Scandinavian countries and many European countries, and to some extent the United States as well, has pushed very hard into renewables while facing down coal over the last 15 years. There seems to be some change in that trend, modestly, but the consensus is largely that the coal has left the station for the point at this moment. What lessons, positive or negative, do you think we have learned over the last 15 years by deprioritizing coal to the extent that it has been, and the emergence of renewables?
We haven't That is, we talking in terms of the population of the world. In terms of certain selected countries, particularly the UK, which now has no coal-fired power plant running at all, Germany, which has seen a very substantial reduction in coal-based generation, have become very dependent upon renewables. But even Germany is now looking to import large quantities of gas. But countries like India, Indonesia, China continue to rely heavily on coal, and in fact, their dependence is increasing. That comment, Ravi, that you made does not apply to the whole world. It applies to certain countries. Australia, which has had official policy now for 12 years of getting rid of coal as a source of electricity, still produces around 65% of its electric power from coal. And this is the direct consequence of its inability to develop renewables, particularly wind and solar, to provide a satisfactory alternative to coal. So it's expected here that coal-fired generation will continue for many years to come. And this despite the fact that there has been massive investment in wind and solar. People talk in terms of installed capacity, in terms of faceplate capacity numbers, but they don't mention that faceplate capacity is one thing, actual production is something else. We hear that China is leading the world in the development of alternate energy. It's moving away from fossil and it's investing heavily in wind and solar renewables. That is true. It is investing very heavily. In 2023, wind and solar in China amounted to 57% of installed capacity. But that 57% produced only 15% of total generation. In the same period, coal produced 65% and gas 6%. So installed capacity is one thing, actual production is something quite different.
Peter, you talk about the amount of electricity produced by coal still, but there is a change in the profile and in the behavior of the power plants. Australia's national electricity market set a record quite recently for instantaneous renewable energy share at nearly 79%. That implies that existing thermal power plants have to behave more flexibly and their reliability could be on risk. What's the impact of having this new kind of profile of operations profile for thermal power plants that were not designed to, that has to still be operating?
It certainly has changed their operating requirements, their operating economics. Thanks to years of government policy, the coal-fired power plants were uncertain as to their future. They're uncertain as to how long they were likely to keep operating. In Australia, as a result of the early privatisation, prices actually went down. Coal-fired power stations, which needed, speaking in Australian dollar terms, around $30 to $32 a megawatt hour to break even, were being faced with market prices of around $25, $26, $27. And they were in serious trouble. Now, that $25 to $28 a megawatt hour is commonly $100 to $150 a megawatt hour. And this has been brought about not by shutting down of coal-fired stations, because only a few of them actually have shut down, but by the increasing penetration of renewables. Yes, there have been moments when a very large fraction of generation in Australia has been provided by wind and solar. There have also been equally much longer periods when the numbers have been reversed. And one speaks here of a so-called wind drought, when areas which would normally expect pretty steady, constant, strong winds, producing lots of wind power energy, will be down to 1 or 2%. And the rest of it made up by coal and gas. But overall, the coal-fired stations, because they have to make room for any generation coming from the renewables, faced with extreme requirements to change the load rapidly, to operate stably at very, very low loads, both of which are very uneconomic for the station, both of which place additional strain on the mechanical equipment, which then requires higher levels of maintenance, which it usually doesn't get, because who is going to invest long-term in power plants that have a short future life expectancy? Now we get the silly situation where people are saying, oh, the price of electricity is high because of the unreliable old coal-fired power stations, whereas that same level of unreliability has been imposed as a direct consequence of operating policies which favor intermittent sources.
AI data centers and electrification driving demand these days, and new generation capacity, do you see reliability starting to take priority again over purely environmental targets? What's your view on that?
I remind you of the items in your definition of the trilemma. Reliability, sustainability, and cost. I think that because electricity is so fundamental to everyday life, every aspect of everyday life, that reliability of supply has to be paramount. Every now and again, you hear of a blackout of maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes. The consequences is near disaster. The consequences of a prolonged or even a short-term outage of electricity are so profound and so consequential that it simply can't be allowed to happen. The standard of reliability in Australia, this is an official standard set down in law, indicates that the transmission system must deliver power continuously, or that it is allowed a total absence of, I think it amounts to 10 minutes a year. And to imagine that this can be supported by a system driven largely by intermittent sources is simply not feasible. So reliability should be the paramount measure. And then we should fit everything in around that. And then you work down in a priority from most reliable to least reliable. And you guess what's down the bottom of the reliability list. So I think that should be the foundation planning policy that dictates how and in what form an electricity supply system is going to be built.
Okay, Peter, and there is so much attention in building new generation. How important is it, in your view, to upgrade and better utilize the power plants that already exist?
I would like to think that any power plant equipment that is being built and is currently operating is being operated in the most economic and productive manner, because these are very large financial investments and assets, and they deserve to be operated in the best possible, most efficient manner, most cost-effective manner. In Australia, anyway, the last coal-fired power plant was built, I think it became operational in 2007. And the privatization that occurred in the early 2000s has resulted in all generation power plants being now held by private companies that bought in the early 2000s. Those companies have not built one single new generating plant. They have built some gas, a couple of combined cycle plants, a few open cycle gas turbine generators, but absolutely nothing new coal. All the coal that was built by these government, and I repeat that every coal power station in Australia, with one exception, was built by government authorities and is now owned by private enterprise that has built no replacement plant and shows no interest or inclination to build replacement plant. They are working hard to maintain the best performance from their existing plant, but they are operating it clearly with the idea that it is a dying asset. It's not an investment prospect. It's now just a cost center which they're trying to recover what value can be recovered from them before they simply disappear. And it's hard to see what they're doing to replace them. They're not doing enough because, as we've seen, not only here, but also in the United States, that the existing plants are losing capacity. They're losing reliability. Some of these power plants are now pushing 50 years. and they really are at the end of their life. There was a power plant that shut down, I think, last year here in New South Wales, Liddell. It was built in the early 70s. When it was finally put to bed, it was 50 years old, and it was never intended to run for 50 years. But the government is so short of capacity that they are now paying old plants to keep going because their owners are finding the maintenance costs are too high to make those plants economically viable. In the United States, they're restarting old nuclear plants. I was amazed to read that a power plant that was built in, I think it started commercial operation in 1968, Palisades, has just restarted operation. It's been rebirthed. They're even talking about restarting 3 Mile Island because they are so short on power. Now, the United States has run down their old coal-fired stations, but they haven't replaced them with solar and wind. They replaced them with gas. And the economic justification was that gas is cheap. But even there, and with the increasing demands of the, as you mentioned, data centers, then there is going to be a real problem in meeting these future demands. So much so that the promoters of the data centers, Google and Amazon and whoever else, is looking to build nuclear plants. And they're making deals with developers of nuclear plants to build plants which have no commercial history at all. They don't exist yet. And yet the operators, the owners of data centers are looking to rely on brand new, untested nuclear technologies to provide power for their data centers. To my mind, this is crazy and is destined to fail. It's going to be interesting what the next few years bring in these areas because I just can't see it happening.
So, Peter, let me ask you this question. So, if coal and gas still provide the majority of reliable, affordable electricity in much of the world, which I quite agree, do you think it is irresponsible for governments to keep politically committing to rapid coal phase-outs before truly scalable, affordable, reliable alternatives are in place?
Yes. Simply put, yes, absolutely great. It's cutting your own throat. China has made plain that while it supports the basic principle of CO2 emission reduction and policies along those lines, it's only going to replace its existing and new building. It's building coal-fired stations faster than anybody can keep count. But it has made plain it's not going to move away from that basis of electricity generation until it's got a proven, practical, and economic alternative. And right at the moment, that proven economic and practical alternative appears to be nuclear because they're building more nuclear capacity than anybody else in the world. In Germany, the last nuclear plant, Emsland, was commissioned and started commercial operation, I think, 1988. And after that, Siemens had no new orders on the books. So it's just that the German utilities didn't want to build any more nuclear plants. So you can't maintain an industry on the basis of tradition. You have to have continuous orders. And Siemens simply stopped getting orders for nuclear plants. This is why when people were talking in the around 2018, 2020, that they could restart some of their nuclear plants that they shut down in 2014, the utility said, we can't because we simply don't have any people, we don't have the manufacturing, we can't make fuel, and the system killed itself. So when Germany decided no more nuclear, it was just a recognition of reality.
So let me pose this question around the root cause over the last several years, which has got a lot of attention from the media and from regulators and politicians across the world. So if billions are still dependent on coal and gas for basic living standards, is CO2 really a major global problem? Or is the bigger challenge how we reduce it without sacrificing affordability and reliability? What is your take on that?
I would have to say to that, I really don't have an opinion. That's too big a question. it probably doesn't matter in a sense, because there is a broad consensus view that is driving world opinion and world government activity that CO2 is a dangerous material, and that once you go above 400 parts per million in the atmosphere, you're on a downward track. And I'm certainly not competent to express an opinion whether that is or is not the case. That would be to go into a discussion of the pros and cons of the whole issue of climate science and the consequences of CO2 emissions. In the case of specific countries, I think that in the case, say, of Australia's total CO2 contributions amount to about 1% of global contributions. So it really doesn't matter what happens here. Idiotic to hear New Zealand talk about how it's going to reduce its carbon footprint. New Zealand could disappear overnight and nobody would even notice as far as CO2 emissions are concerned. And anyway, New Zealand has traditionally produced more than 50% of its power from hydro, and another very large section from geothermal. So CO2 emissions in New Zealand was never an issue, but they made one out of it. And the government took a very strong position on this. And New Zealand is leading the world in CO2 reductions. People stop smoking. The Australia is not far behind in terms of total emissions, but the fact remains that the collection of countries called the European Union produce far less CO2 than other parts of the world, which are eagerly building more coal-fired power stations. This is why I say that if the debate could be returned to a factual, technical expertise basis, we might make some progress, but it isn't. It's become an emotional issue. And that's why I think it's very difficult to express firm views on issues which are essentially emotional.
So, Peter, thank you. It's been a fantastic conversation. And before closing, I would like to ask you a common question we ask to all our guest speakers. If you had a magic wand and you could try to unlock the energy trilemma with that magic wand, what would you ask?
For a magic wand, I think that the whole approach to electricity supply, generating alternatives, the way it all fits together with an appropriate grid, that this be conducted primarily on the basis of technical expertise by people who actually understand all those issues. Instead, we find it conducted by people with fringe knowledge of this or that, but little actual practical hands-on experience of any aspect of the industry which they are attempting to define. I think there's a role to be played. The public should identify what it wants and how, in general terms, it should be done. But I would like to think that decisions relating to the specifics of what is done and how it's done be left to those with the technical expertise and understanding of the deeper issues involved.
Fantastic. Peter, thank you very much indeed for this conversation. It has been a pleasure, and we hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. Thanks,
Okay,
Peter.
it was a very pleasant for me too.
We hope you liked this conversation. Follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe for free to the podcast on the platform of your choice, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, or Apple. Because in the next episode, Ravi and Jam will speak with another expert about the energy trilemma.